Goody. I am the Maven of the Eventide. Welcome to Vampire Reviews. So we're talking about Blade. Again, tonight we look at the TV series. No, sadly not that one. The live-action one from 2006. It's not at all based on the comics, but set in the continuity of the Blade movies starring Wesley Snipes. It premiered 2 years after Blade Trinity, which is the one with Ryan Reynolds playing the same character he always plays. We'll talk about that one another night. But if you haven't seen it, it doesn't matter. In Trinity, Blade and friends develop a way to finally destroy all vampires once and for all, but the TV series tells us right off that, never mind, it didn't work. And Blade's right back where he started. Again, fighting his one-man war against the presumably hundreds of thousands of vampires all over the world. Oh, Blade. The series premiered on Spike TV and was actually the network's first original scripted series. You know Spike TV, right? It's changed a lot over the years, but it launched in 2003, calling itself the first network for men. The very first. Every network ever before in the history of television, not for men. No. When's it going to be men's turn to have things? Spike TV was here to solve this obvious problem, fill this gaping need in the television landscape, cater to a niche that had been previously woefully ignored. And what did this manly network show? Mostly wrestling, fighting, stoner cartoons, reruns of Star Trek and CSI, and extreme reality shows. After a couple years of this, Spike developed a reputation as being somewhat lowbrow, and it was losing advertisers who thought it was too focused on violence and sex appeal. This shocked the network heads. Could no one see how sophisticated their man channel truly was? They decided they needed to do a bit of rebranding to really impress that male 18 to 34 demographic. And in 2006 released this new logo and an updated edgy slogan, "Get more action," which, get it? It's focusing on action programming. Dudes love action movies, but also it sounds like it's talking about sex. Yeah, watch Spike TV and you'll get laid, man! Your masculinity is overflowing now! And along with this rebrand came Blade. Undeniably one of the stereotypically manliest superheroes to ever action in action franchise. Dudes love Blade. And of course, to appeal to the Spike audience, the show is also full of violence and sex appeal. But to be fair, it is worth noting that Spike was not what the show's creators had in mind when they conceived it. David S. Goyer, the same guy who wrote all the Blade movies, created this series too. And the network his people really wanted was Showtime. But Showtime wouldn't take the show without Wesley Snipes on board, so Spike TV it was. Wesley Snipes wasn't interested in doing the series. He barely made it through doing the third movie with his sanity intact and filed a lawsuit against the studio for pissing him off. You don't mess with Wesley Snipes. So, Spike TV's first original scripted show. It was going to take the network to new places, reel in that man audience, and sustain it for years. It lasted for 1 season. It's not that it was bad, it was different from the movies, but it still had key Blade elements in place. And its 2-hour pilot episode did very well, hitting some record ratings. But despite the powerhouse producers behind it, it couldn't keep the audience's interest and viewership dropped steadily through the season, and the network simply couldn't afford a second one. They say no one wanted to cancel it, they just didn't have the money. Which is kind of saying something, cause this show does not look expensive. Unlike the Blade films with their action scenes and grand gothic sets, sweeping cityscapes, each frame looking like a comic book panel, the series gets grandma's apartment and high school gyms in the middle of nowhere. It's set in Detroit, but they actually filmed it in economical Vancouver, and the network still couldn't afford a season 2. It's especially disappointing because season 1 ends on a fantastic cliffhanger that we'll never get to see fulfilled. Even if it didn't have the Spike TV stink all over it, it still wouldn't have been a great show. But it's better than a lot of the other vampire stuff out there. It's pretty alright, relatively speaking. It's alright. For something made for the most gratuitous of anti-feminist networks, it's got some wonderfully complex female characters for one thing. And it's probably the most vampire-iest vampire show that ever vampired. Seriously, you think True Blood had a lot of vampires? Buffy? They got nothing on this. He's a vampire, and she's a vampire, and he's a vampire, and she's a vampire, and him, and him, and her, and her, and her, and him, and him, and him, and him, and you get the picture. Every moment in the show is about vampires doing vampire things for vampire reasons in the vampire-iest way possible. The only non-vampire characters exist either to work for the vampires, hunt the vampires, or get attacked by the vampires. It's seriously non-stop. And yes, I am including Blade in this. He is a vampire. He's just a special one. We even learn in the series that he can turn other people into vampires, and has. Lots of them, apparently. So what is this show about? Well, first of all, it's not about Blade. It thinks it is, it wishes it were, but it's not. As we've discussed before, Blade is a shallow, static character, and you really can't make a story about someone who's not dynamic, since that's what stories are. They are accounts of how something changes. Something's gotta change, or you don't have a story. Blade doesn't change. This isn't his story, and no one wants Blade to change. Well, his friends want it, but David S. Goyer thinks the audience doesn't, apparently. Blade doesn't learn things about himself, he doesn't grow, he barely even has feelings. One episode is devoted to his tragic backstory, and we see how he was a pretty sweet kid who struggled with being different, whose father struggled to do right by him. Blade thinks his father betrays him and then accidentally gets him killed, which drives him to spend years on the run doing horrible vampire things with horrible people, until Whistler finds him and turns his life around, making him into the heartless killing machine we know and love today. In this episode, we learn that Blade's father is alive and has always loved him and just wants what's best for him. But Blade don't care. Blade is not interested in reconnecting. Blade rejects him and moves on with life, and the entire experience has absolutely no impact on his motivation or drive in the story, showing us once again what a tragic, hopeless figure Blade is. Blade wants to kill vampires, he gets to kill vampires. The end. There is no emotional core to his story, not anymore. Even swimming through a sea of murderous monsters, he is the least human character here. It's shown over and over again that he doesn't even care about his friends. They're just tools to use in his vampire killing agenda. We keep hoping that we'll see him crack and admit, or at least imply, that he does care deep down, give us some thread of humanity for the audience to connect with him, but the show never lets it happen. He doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, just work, work, work. He meditates sometimes, but though the series shows us him doing this, it never shows us what it means to him. It's just there to look cool. He's played by Kirk Jones, better known as Sticky Fingers the Rapper, and Sticky does a great job blading it up as much as bladingly possible. He looks amazing. He's playing a one-note character, but he hits that note every time. So compared to Blade, the rest of the vampire characters are downright Shakespearean. There are so many that we'd be here for hours if we examined each of them in all their layers, so let's just look at the main three, shall we? This is Krista Starr, and the show, it's about her. This is Krista's story. Blade is nothing more than her grumpy boss. We spend 13 hours following Krista's journey as a new vampire, and it's a pretty satisfying one. She's a soldier who's just come home from the Iraq War after some pretty traumatic experiences to find out her twin brother is murdered. She investigates and learns he was working for Blade, trying to infiltrate vampire society. Blade has her become his new mole, but by the end of the pilot, the vampire big boss of Detroit is seriously crushing on her, so he makes her one of them. With the help of Blade's serum, she's able to secretly keep her moral compass, and from the inside helps Blade get closer to taking down the vampires than he's ever been before. Her time as a double agent is fraught and tense and keeping her vampire nature in check isn't magically easy. She loses control again and again, makes mistakes, and has victories, and eventually gets better at her job. Through the experience, she grows from a revenge-driven, immature grumpy pants to a balanced, healthier person with a deeper understanding of the complexities of human and vampire nature and the world around her, able to see the bigger picture, no longer blinded by her own desires. Yes, she is a woman on Spike TV, so of course she's overly sexualized. There are many contrived scenes for her to be conveniently nude, but unlike so many female vampires throughout history, she is not a seductress. Even when she's naked, she's not usually doing sexy things. She's usually struggling with inner turmoil.
I hear you're having a difficult time.
Yeah, that's the bitch.
The nudity represents her fears and vulnerabilities. Her character is not built around sex at all. And despite being an action girl, she doesn't ever make a point about not being like the other girls or disparaging femininity. She is a great, well-developed vampire character who just happens to be female. Remember that top 10 female vampires list I made about 5 years ago? If I had known about Krista back then, she would have knocked Celine right off it. This is Chase, and she's not as well-rounded as Krista, but she's still got a lot going for her. She's a vampire to the core, fully embracing her nature, repulsed by vampires who would resist it. And she's driven by the violent darkness that overtakes vampires in this universe once they give into their bloodlust. So, of course, that makes her less complex. But despite her affinity for sexy outfits, she doesn't exist as a sex symbol either. She is the vampire big boss's right hand, and she works hard, taking on his most important missions. Her primary character trait is ambition, and she's motivated by pursuit of power. Before her boss took an interest in Krista, Chase was kind of his girlfriend, and she does not take well to being replaced. But we find out by the end that it's not because she was mooning over this jerk like a jilted fool. It's because she wants to climb that power ladder. He keeps making it clear that he is so not into her anymore, but she keeps coming back to him, putting him before everything, and you're watching this thinking like, oh my god, girl, why? But then, in the final climax, she betrays him, and we realize it was just his prestige in the social hierarchy that mattered to her, not him as a person. When she finds a way to step over him and move higher on her own, she seizes it. She plays the long game, and she's good at it. There are so many other interesting female vampires in this show, like Bugface Baby Eating O'Brien, and her beleaguered henchwoman, and the highly efficient secretary, and perhaps another night. But this is Marcus Van Sciver, the series' primary antagonist. And he's a bad guy, but he's a bad guy with feelings. So many feelings. Especially compared to soulless robot Blade. Marcus is also charming and British, and if this show weren't on a network that's just for men and no girls allowed, I'd presume the way he's presented is meant to be romantic for the ladies. He has a soft side, a brooding pretty boy that maybe can be fixed with love? Maybe, if I just keep trying? Krista gets to psychically see his tragic backstory about how vampires destroyed everything he loved when he was human and turned him into one of them against his will. And it makes her feel things for him, conflicting things, despite the fact that he murdered her brother and made her a monster and her mission is to destroy him. And he does seem genuinely into her as much as his dark vampire heart will let him be. In this world, vampires are members of clans called houses, and there are 12 of them. They are headed by pure-blood vampires who were born and have never been human. These are few and rare. The rest of the vampires are turned-bloods, former humans. Marcus is one of the highest-ranking turned-blood in his house, Chthon, and headquarters in Detroit. He's 100 years old and has worked his way up from the bottom and hit the glass ceiling of the vampire class system. And he's got 2 axes to grind. Well, 3 if you count Blade, but Blade is so off to the side of the real story going on that he hardly matters to Marcus emotionally. He's just a pest. Marcus wants revenge on the vampire who ruined his mortal life. A pure-blood jerk who's done so many terrible things he doesn't even remember what he did. Marcus succeeds in this, and it's violent and raw and emotional and serves as a turning point for his, Krista's, and Chase's characters. It's the equivalent of Blade defeating Deacon Frost in the first movie. You know, an emotion-driven character goal that actually matters. But most importantly, Marcus wants to smash the glass ceiling and permanently change the vampire class structure to put himself on top, to rule the thing that has always ruled him. The series starts with him developing a cure for vampire weaknesses so they can all be daywalkers like Blade. And this is the exact same plot of all 3 Blade movies and has seriously gotten old by now. But then, the show twists it. There is no cure. Instead, Marcus is secretly developing a virus that only targets purebloods. And when Blade finds out about this, he's like, that's cool. Go for it. Kill all the purebloods. Do my work for me. Yeah, thanks. He decides to sit back and let Marcus do what he wants and wait to go after him later. So, the thing about storycraft is that your antagonistic forces need to have opposing goals. When they no longer have opposing goals, the story's over. And since Krista's goals are the same as Blade's and they're on board with Marcus now, her story's ostensibly over. Now, the story belongs to Marcus, and the antagonistic force is the purebloods, which is interesting. He's a good character, but okay, for a show named after one of our few precious black superheroes to actually be about these 2 white people? The fact that Blade is black matters in a deliberate vampire allegory about class structure. From the very first film, when Deacon Frost was trying to break the glass ceiling and vampires were overwhelmingly white. As a daywalker and a black man, Blade is an outsider. He's fine with that when it comes to the vampires, but he's also an outsider among humans, which is a thing a lot of comic book fans can relate to. But instead of getting a show about how Blade faces and handles the hurdles society throws at him for the fortune of his birth, we get to focus on this straight white man dealing with being oppressed by his mafia crime family. Poor Marcus. The class structure stuff goes further than purebloods and turnbloods. Most turnbloods belong to houses, but there are some who are unaligned, outcast from all the houses, who exist as third-class citizens. The vampires Blade turned when he was a kid are some of these, and there's a Problem of the Week episode devoted to their attempts to climb the ladder by using him as an offering. They fail. They all die. And soulless robot Blade feels absolutely nothing about it, even though they're his vampire babies. But besides being his fledglings, they're also some of the very few black vampires we get to see. And when the rich white man in the high tower rejects them, that fact adds poignancy to the legitimate statement they're making here on the myth of class mobility, which is then kinda contradicted when we see Marcus actually achieving his goals at the climax.
Pureblood's dead is a win. Marcus further up the ladder is a win.
Another big theme of the series is addiction. The vampires are addicted to drinking blood. Most of them love it, especially considering the awesome vampire powers they get in exchange, but there are those who don't.
It turned us into addicts. It gave us the thirst. That pain so deep inside that it never goes away.
Blade and Krista tame their addiction with the serum, and we're introduced to another vampire house where all the vampires have given up drinking blood from people and only drink cloned blood. Most vampires view them as a creepy cult, but Krista considers them as a possibility. They're not cured, but they're managing their addiction in a functional way. We also learn how humans are addicted to using vampire ash as a drug with gruesome side effects. All this isn't that original. We've seen vampirism used as an allegory for addiction plenty of times, but the show does make a relevant and important point about it. When Krista gives in to her bloodlust, Blade forces her through a detox. He tells her if it doesn't work, he'll kill her. It's excruciating for her, but she comes out of it successful and she asks,
Does it ever get any better?
Every time I kill a vampire.
So no, it doesn't. It is a constant struggle that she will be fighting for eternity. The only other option is death.
But you have a choice. Keep going or not.
It is a common misconception that addicts can be cured. In the movies, Blade has a cure for vampires and uses it whenever he wants. But the series got rid of that because there is no magic cure for addiction in the real world. There's management, there's therapy, but treatment is lifelong. It is hard work. And addicts need society's support and care. And if this show actually did anything to get through to people to help destigmatize addiction, thank you, Blade the TV series. thank you, Manly Spike TV. You know, it only took Spike 9 more years before they decided to rebrand again in a way to make the network more inclusive to women. And as of this year, they've ditched the Spike name and all of its baggage entirely to become the Paramount Network. Yes, I am afraid there is no more network for men anymore, you guys. Nope. No networks at all. Sorry. You're gonna have to go read books or something. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and yes, we'll talk about Blade Trinity eventually, but have you seen it? Worst Dracula ever. So what do you think? These ones? These? Oh, I think these are my fledglings glasses. Seriously? Thank you for watching my review of Blade, the TV series. Yeah, this one was another Patreon request, and I think you patrons just love making me go outside my comfort zone. Thank you. Please join my Patreon and contribute to the madness. Also, like this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the alert bell thing, because if you don't, you won't get the updates. And follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook, just follow me everywhere. I have so many glasses. You need some glasses? Come get some glasses.